Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be looking at some skeletal muscle. So this slide here is showing you skeletal muscle in longitudinal section. So we have here are a bunch of skeletal muscle fibers, and this would make up one fascicle, and there's a bit of space in between them. This space is actually filled with connective tissue. We don't really see the connective tissue here very well. Part of it is just because it's probably an artifact of preparation. This space would not be as large, but there's in fact evidence here that there is some stuff in between them. It looks like connective tissue and potentially part of a blood vessel in here. So it's likely to be the perimysium, and then this would be a second fascicle over here. Now, one of the things to note is that these are very, very long, straight cells. In fact, we really don't refer to them as cells, we refer to them as fibers, because they don't really have some of the properties of cells. They're in fact multinucleated and much, much longer than a typical cell. So they will be multiple centimeters in length. 2 to 3 is fairly typical. They would span the full length of your biceps muscle, for example. So what you see here is a very long fiber. Okay, a very common mistake is to confuse this for a tendon. Okay, but a tendon isn't quite as regular appearing as this. So you can actually see individual fibers being very thick, and the nuclei are closely associated with the fiber here. So let me just zoom in on this. This is 100x magnification right now. I'm going to go over to 400x. And so we can see here is these individual muscle fibers are multinucleated, so you can see the nuclei around the outside of these cells. Okay, so for example, this cell here, we got 2 nuclei right there, right next to one another. There's another one a little further down that also belongs to this muscle fiber here. Okay, so these are definitely multinucleated cells and very, very long, very straight, long sort of fibers. Now this space down here, this little gap between the cells, would be filled with a little bit of connective tissue as well. And so this connective tissue in here would be known as the endomysium. Endo meaning within, so this is within the muscle fascicle you have endomysium, whereas at the edge of the fascicle you have the perimysium. You can think of peri as in around the outside of something, the perimeter of something. Okay, so in this region here we would have a slightly thicker layer of connective tissue with some of the small blood vessels, small arteries, small veins in here, whereas the endomysium is likely to contain capillaries. Okay, so if we go in here, in between these muscle fibers, you might periodically notice some capillaries filled with red blood cells. So if you look around this slide, you probably will find a few cases where this is actually showing up. Okay, so again, skeletal muscle, longitudinal section, you have very long, fairly thick fibers. Now let me see if I can get to a higher magnification and see if we can find some striations here. Striations aren't always easy to see under the light microscope. If you don't have a really well stained slide, you don't usually see them. So you really just rely on the thickness of the fiber, the length of the fiber, and the multinucleated nature of it. And again, the nuclei are eccentric because the cell is just completely filled with protein, with myofibrils, and so everything else just gets pushed over to the edges. Let me take this microscope slide over to 1000x magnification and see if we can make out any striations here. And there they are. Okay, so we are in fact looking at striated muscle. Let me just try to boost the contrast a little bit so you can see it more clearly. Okay, so we have some striations visible on this slide here. Okay, again, this is not a very well stained slide. It's not very intense staining, so it's a bit more difficult to see. Some slides are a bit better than this. If you have a much more intensely stained slide, sometimes you can see the striations a little bit better than this. Okay, but you can clearly see again that there are striations here. So this is striated muscle, skeletal muscle in this case. Okay. Now I'm going to switch over to a different slide, and we're going to go and take a look at a cross section through skeletal muscle as well. So let me just switch over, and we'll be right back. Okay, so I've got the next slide queued up, so let's switch over to the 4DX lens to get an overview of what we're looking at. So this is actually a bone slide, so we have a cross section through some bone here and some bone marrow, but we're going to focus on the outside of this in this case, which contains the muscle. Okay, and so even at this magnification, you're starting to notice a bit of an organization and cross section through the smooth muscle where you see the fascicles. So let's take a closer look at these things so you can get a better view of what's going on. So 100x magnification, we're starting to see some of the nuclei here. And again, this right here will be a fascicle, so let me just kind of try to outline it for you. So right here is the tip of the fascicle. Okay, so where my pointer is right now would be the perimysium. Difficult to do this sometimes. Okay, here we go. Again, perimysium's over here. Okay, and again, so this is the top edge of that fascicle. Okay, so that would be one single fascicle. It's composed of multiple muscle fibers. Now let's take a look at it in more detail. So let's zoom in again, go to 400x magnification. And so here, just looking at the same fascicle, you can see multiple cells. Each one of them has multiple nuclei. So here's one nucleus. Oops. This stage control mechanism is a little bit fussy. Okay, so here's one nucleus, and you can see around the cell multiple other nuclei as well. Okay, so again, very typical skeletal muscle, nuclei around the edges. The cell itself is just filled with protein. Now again, this material that is in between the cells, the clear spaces around the individual cells, that's where you'd find the endomysium. Okay, so again, this is all, each cell is surrounded by an endomysium, and then around here, where we have a space between two fascicles, so here's one fascicle, here's the other fascicle, so this space here would contain the perimysium. So you can see some of the blood vessels in this perimysium right here. Okay, so again, arterioles, small arteries would be in here, and then capillaries would be down within the endomysium. Okay, now if I move this pointer over, kind of just travel over further out here, this region is more connective tissue on the outside of the whole muscle. So this would be the epimysium in this case. Okay, so again, connective tissue on the outside of skeletal muscle would be known as the epimysium. Okay, so again, let's zoom out a little bit. So again, on the surface, epimysium, then we have fascicles inside, and here we have in between the fascicles connective tissue, and so we have some small blood vessels here. So there's a small artery right there. Okay, so this is the perimysium, and then within a single fascicle you're going to have multiple cells, and each cell is going to be surrounded by the endomysium. Okay, so hopefully this has been helpful. We'll see you in the next video.